The frontier towns of the American West were rough, dusty places where law and lawlessness often walked side by side, and in October of 1881, no town captured that dangerous balance better than Tombstone, Arizona. Tombstone had sprung up almost overnight, a silver boomtown rising from the barren desert, drawing miners, gamblers, prospectors, drifters, and gunmen alike. The promise of wealth glittered beneath its rocky hills, but alongside fortune came vice saloons, brothels, and gambling halls. By 1881, Tombstone was home to nearly 7,000 residents, making it one of the fastest-growing settlements in the West. But it was also a town divided. On one side were the lawmen, Virgil Earp, Tombstone's town marshal, his younger brothers Wyatt and Morgan, who often assisted him, and the sharp-witted, consumptive dentist-turned-gambler and gunslinger, Holliday. On the other side stood the Cowboys, a loose association of rustlers and outlaws, led by men like Ike and Billy Clanton, Tom and Frank McLaury, and Billy Claiborne. These men smuggled cattle from Mexico, robbed stages, and intimidated townsfolk. Yet they had friends in high places and supporters who believed the Earps were no better. It was a powder keg waiting for a spark, and on October 26, 1881, in a dusty back lot near the Corral, the spark ignited. The gunfight that followed lasted barely half a minute. 30 shots, fired in about 30 seconds, but it would echo through American history, transforming Wyatt Earp from a frontier lawman into a legend. The story begins months before that fateful day. Wyatt Earp was not born into legend. He was born in 1848 in Monmouth, Illinois, one of 9 children in a restless frontier family. The Earps were never strangers to hardship or violence. By the time Wyatt reached adulthood, he had already worked as a buffalo hunter, a policeman, a gambler, and even faced charges of horse theft. His older brother Virgil carried himself with the steady authority of a lawman, while Morgan, the younger, was quick to lend his gun to family causes. The family wasn't about law for law's sake, it was about survival, about control, about establishing dominance in towns that often teetered on the edge of chaos. Wyatt himself straddled the line between enforcer and outlaw, moving from Dodge City to Wichita to Tombstone, seeking opportunities both in law enforcement and gambling ventures. Tombstone seemed the perfect place for the Earps to stake their claim. But already, another faction held sway: the Cowboys. The Cowboys weren't a formal gang, but a group of ranchers and rustlers who thrived in the lawless borderlands of Arizona. They drove stolen Mexican cattle across the border, ambushed stagecoaches, and carried guns wherever they pleased. Among them were Ike and Billy Clanton, sons of a local rancher, and the McLaury brothers, Tom and Frank. These men weren't just outlaws. They were backed by political allies who despised the Earps' attempts to impose order on Tombstone. It was more than a clash of law versus crime. It was a collision of interests, pride, and survival. By the fall of 1881, tensions had escalated. On October 25th, Ike Clanton and Holliday nearly came to blows in a saloon. Clanton, known for his temper and for running his mouth when drunk, threatened the Earps repeatedly, saying that they would be run out of Tombstone. Witnesses later recalled Ike pacing the streets into the early hours, armed and furious. The next morning, October 26, Ike Clanton was arrested by Virgil Earp for carrying weapons in town, a violation of city ordinance. Fined and humiliated, Ike was seething. By midday, his allies Billy Clanton, Tom and Frank McLaury, and young Billy Claiborne had joined him in town. They carried pistols and rifles, walking Tombstone streets openly, daring the Earps to confront them. Word spread quickly. A showdown was coming. Virgil Earp deputized his brothers Wyatt and Morgan, along with Holliday. Together, the 4 men set out to disarm the Cowboys, determined to restore order before blood was shed. As the afternoon sun dropped low, casting long shadows across Tombstone's dusty streets, the 2 groups converged. The Cowboys stood in a vacant lot behind the Corral, some with hands resting on their gun grips, others glaring at the approaching lawmen. Virgil Earp called out, "Throw up your hands, boys. I want your guns." But the Cowboys did not surrender. What happened next lasted no more than 30 seconds, yet it has been told and retold for nearly a century and a half. According to witnesses, Wyatt Earp and Frank McLaury fired almost simultaneously. Muzzle flashes tore the dry air. Holliday, wielding a shotgun, let off a blast that struck Tom McLaury. Billy Clanton staggered backward, firing wildly even as bullets ripped into his chest. Virgil took a shot to the leg. Morgan was struck across the back. Grazed by a bullet across the hip. But when the smoke cleared, 3 Cowboys lay dead: Billy Clanton, Tom McLaury, and Frank McLaury. Ike Clanton and Billy Claiborne had fled. unscathed. The Earps and Holliday stood blooded but alive. The aftermath was chaos. Tombstone's residents were divided. Some hailed the Earps as heroes who had stood up to outlaw terror. Others condemned them as murderers who had provoked a gunfight. The bodies of the slain cowboys were displayed for the public, their wounds grim testimony to the violence of the shootout. Newspapers quickly seized upon the story, fanning the flames of legend. A formal hearing followed, stretching over weeks, with testimony from dozens of witnesses. The Earps and Holliday were charged with murder, but ultimately exonerated. Judge Wellspeaker ruled that the lawmen had acted within their duty to disarm armed men threatening violence. But for the Earps, victory was short-lived. The Cowboys sought revenge. Months later, Morgan Earp was gunned down while playing billiards, assassinated by unknown assailants believed to be cowboy allies. Virgil was ambushed and crippled, his arm permanently maimed. For Wyatt, it was too much. In what became known as the Earp Vendetta ride, Wyatt gathered a posse and hunted down those he held responsible. Over weeks of relentless pursuit, several cowboys were killed. Wyatt Earp had crossed the line from lawman to avenger. Wyatt lived long after Tombstone, drifting to California, Nevada, and eventually Hollywood, where he mingled with early movie stars and watched his own legend grow. He died in 1929, not as an outlaw, not even as a lawman, but as a figure larger than life, an American myth whose story blurred the line between fact and fiction. And the Wyatt Corral, the gunfight remains one of the most famous in American history, studied, reenacted, and immortalized in film and literature. Yet when stripped down, it was nothing more than a brief, brutal clash, 30 seconds of smoke and fire that defined a century of Western mythology. Thank you for watching Crimes Through Time. If you found this story gripping, hit the like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the darkest chapters of history. And tell us in the comments, do you think Wyatt Earp was truly a hero lawman, or just another gunslinger fighting for his own interests? We'll see you in the next episode. Until then, stay curious, stay safe,